Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So before we get into today's review, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to each and every one of you guys who have subscribed to my channel. I just hit 300 subscribers and I'm so grateful to each and every one of you who pressed that subscribe button and comment down below and let me know all of your thoughts on the TV shows and movies that I review here on my channel. I absolutely love having you guys here in my little corner of the internet. So thank you so much. And to those of you who haven't subscribed, be sure to subscribe, join the fam so you can catch new uploads, and don't forget to hit that notification bell as well because apparently that's necessary. Thanks a lot, YouTube. Without further ado, let's get into our regular scheduled programming. So I just watched Artemis Fowl. Let's talk about it. So Artemis Fowl is directed by Sir Kenneth Branagh, director of Thor, the first one, and of the 2015 live-action remake of Cinderella. Now, you'll notice that with both of these films, they have some things in common, including the fantastical, brilliant, unique element and aesthetic that they have to them that really make them stand apart, especially when you have the case of Thor and the Asgard scenes. He created Asgard in that first film, and he set the precedent for the following films after that, and it was just so brilliant the way that he was able to realize the world of Asgard, just how he was able to bring the magic in Cinderella in this live action remake. And so to see this film, to see Artemis Fowl just fail on all accounts to do what these other two films did brilliantly was just mind-boggling. I didn't even realize he directed this film. I didn't even realize that Kenneth Branagh had directed this film. It was unrecognizable to me. It was just such a generic YA. You know what? We're going to get into this, but first of all, just to let you know, this is going to be a non-spoiler review for once. I'm not interested in diving into this film in any particular detail, so we're just going to be covering general points, so there won't be any spoilers. And also, I'm going to be diving into the stuff that I really didn't like about this film first off, before moving on to the positive stuff so that we can end on a positive note. And as a final point, there's another topic that I wanted to touch on in this video, and that is why Disney cannot do, for the life of them, a live action film. Why do they always flop? I'm talking about the live action films that aren't Marvel, that aren't the Disney animated remakes, that aren't anything to do with Star Wars. I'm talking about the ones that are adapted from books or from real life. Like, why are they almost always so bad? So bad, especially lately. We're going to be diving into that topic at the end of this video. We're going to be investigating here, working together to figure out if we can answer the question of why. Why can't Disney make a decent family live action film that isn't attached to an already existing IP? Okay, so now going back to my review of Artemis Fowl specifically, and first things first, full disclosure, I'm not that familiar with the books. I can't comment on the book to movie adaptation comparisons because I've never read the books. Honestly, I've never seen them before. I feel like maybe they're a generation below me, so I'm not familiar with that whatsoever. But what I do know after having seen the trailer and reading some of the YouTube comments below it is that apparently this Artemis Fowl is supposed to be like a villainous character. He's supposed to be a little devious, a little bit of a bad guy. And so it surprises me then to see that in this film, and they even hint towards it by calling him like a criminal and trying to imply that he has this criminal background. But in this film, you don't get that sense whatsoever. This film has no edge. It has no edge, even though it's trying to say that it does, that this character is edgy, that he's cool, that he's a criminal mastermind. I don't see that. Where do I see? I'm looking for it. I don't see any of that, and it shocks me because Josh Gad is telling me, like, he is blue in the face and he is telling me, no, you need to take this character seriously because he's a genius and he's a criminal and he will cut some people up. And I'm just like, I don't see that whatsoever. I see a child wearing early 2000s sunglasses. That's what I see. I don't see a criminal mastermind. Where? And to me, that is a big shame when it comes to this film because that is a unique selling point, having this character who acts as a protagonist in this story, but is actually the antagonist of someone else's story. They're a bad guy. They're a criminal mastermind, as they keep insisting. That would be a really interesting angle to take things in because otherwise, what is setting this film apart from every other YA series. I'm seeing elements of Men in Black, I'm seeing elements of Percy Jackson, but with Irish lore instead of the Greek mythology. And to me, the character of Artemis himself doesn't really stand out as a unique character. And I think really honing in on the fact that he is a criminal would have sold that. But of course, let's talk about the real reason why we can't do that. The real reason is because this is Disney. This is Disney Plus, and they cannot afford to advocate for a criminal mastermind protagonist at the center of their film, because it goes against sort of the family Disney values that they want to promote on their platform and in their brand. So they were never really going to lean in on the criminal aspect of this character, but as a result, they just did the character and his unique selling point a disservice. And secondly, and closely related to my first point, and now this is tricky because I don't generally like to bash child actors because they're children. They are children, and I don't want to be a bully, but what I will say is that I personally did not find the actor that portrays Artemis Fowl Jr. We'll talk about Artemis Fowl Sr. in a moment. I didn't find him to be the most charismatic. I'm sorry, I just didn't find him to be a very interesting actor. I didn't like the way that he delivered a lot of his lines, but that wasn't just him. A lot of the actors were delivering lines very bizarrely. Like, they were delivering it as if it was a table read. I was just thinking, like, this cannot be the final draft. Like, if this was an essay that I was writing for uni, I would have to look over it again. This cannot be the final draft, because it definitely felt like they were doing a table read. Everyone was reading their part, you know, one after the other. The conversations didn't feel natural and organic in the slightest. They felt very practiced and rehearsed and choppy. And to make it worse, there were moments where the characters were talking to one another, especially when Artemis was talking to his, like, Mr. Butler. He's not an actual butler, but his name is Mr. Butler. And it felt like the voices were being dubbed over, because I was watching it and I was trying to see if they were, and if the mouths actually moved along with the sounds that I was hearing. But it just felt like the voices were being overdubbed, because it didn't feel like a natural, organic conversation that was taking place in that environment. It was very bizarre. So this, combined with the fact that the actor, in my opinion, didn't really make the role his own, he didn't really shine as this character, it meant that this whole story took place with this rather lackluster and uninteresting character at its center. Although I will say one positive when it came to the actor that portrays Artemis Fowl Jr. is that he actually had an Irish accent. This story is supposed to take place in Ireland, because I believe the books are written by an Irish author and they surround, you know, Irish mythology, so that makes sense. But the characters in this story, in this film, do not sound Irish in the slightest. You have Josh Gad doing, I don't know what accent, I don't know where he's from. He sounds like an Irish immigrant who migrated to the US like decades ago. That's what he sounds like. He doesn't sound Irish for the most part, but there are moments where you're like, oh, I can hear the Irish in. Oh, no, now it's gone again. And it was a similar thing with Judi Dench, which, can we just talk about the fact that Judi Dench is in this film for a second? How did she let this happen for a second time within a year? First it was Cats, now this? What are you doing here? Judi Dench? Dame Judi Dench, what are you doing here? I actually don't think her performance was terrible in this film. She had the croakiest of voices. I kept clearing my own throat because I just kept feeling like her croaky voice was giving me a sore throat. It was so bad. Her and Josh Gad were just like, it was awful. It was terrible. I wanted to cough for her. But yeah, I don't understand why she's in this film, and I certainly don't understand her accent in here. There are times when it sounds really good, like a proper Irish accent, but then there are times where I'm just like, oh, we've lost it. We've lost the signal. And to make matters worse, you actually have Colin Farrell, a native Irishman, in this film, and you hear his accent here, and it just emphasizes how off everyone else sounds, to put it lightly. And speaking of Colin Farrell, this film continues on a long-standing tradition in the Disney archives of getting Colin Farrell in a live-action Disney film and then just wasting him. completely wasting him. We saw this happen in the live action Dumbo, and we see it happen here as well. The role that he did actually have to play in this film, not only was it underused, but the stuff that he was saying just didn't feel very convincing either. They're trying to build up the world of the fairies and the mystical elements of it, and it just doesn't seem convincing, and not even Colin Farrell could sell me on it, which is just, it's saying something. And speaking of the world of the fairies, like I said earlier on, this film is directed by Kenneth Branagh, who brought to us the world of Thor, lore and Norse mythology and Asgard in the MCU. And he brought us this beautiful reimagination of Cinderella. How are we getting this for Artemis Fowl? How? The Irish mythology that they use here could have been done so beautifully, so elegantly, so magically, but instead we decide to go for this cyberpunk, steampunk aesthetic in the wonderful land of the fairies. Are you joking? The combination of Kenneth Branagh and Disney could have brought us this fantastical, magical reimagination of a fairy world. But instead they decide to settle on this dystopian aesthetic that is just so grim and not aesthetically pleasing in the slightest. I was so disappointed to see that this is the world that Artemis is diving into. Like, the whole story surrounding this character is that his father was reading him stories of this magical land where fairies exist, and so do trolls and gremlins and who knows what else. And yet when we get the big reveal of what the land actually looks like, it's just green and grim and boring. Nothing that we haven't seen before a million times over. It was just disappointing. I expected more from Disney and Kenneth Branagh, truly. At the very least, they could have given me the magic. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a theory as to why they didn't. My theory is that this is supposed to be geared towards preteen boys, and having a fantastical, magical world full of fairies and, fairy dust and magic and whatnot would have skewed a bit too female. That's my theory. So instead of making it all pretty and fanciful like Tinkerbell threw up all over the place, they decided to make it grim and steampunk and edgy. Except it's not really edgy because it's a kids film, so they're not satisfying anyone in that sense. And just on a technical note, I would say that the cinematography of the film is really unimpressive. It doesn't look aesthetically pleasing just in general, despite the fact that the house itself presents itself as a really nice setting, but the way that it's portrayed is just ugly. It just looks very ugly. And on top of that, you have this terrible mid-2000s CG being utilized. Like, this is the type of CG that you would expect from a Disney Channel film. And in fact, that's the aesthetic of this whole film. A Disney Channel original movie. There, I hit the nail on the head. That's what it reminded me of. That it makes sense now. Having said all that, I did say that I would end this review on a positive note. And so I'll say that I like Josh Gad. I like Josh Gad in this film, even though his accent was all over the place. I did like him. They had some funny jabs here and there about gluten and about David Bowie. Like, that was funny. I enjoyed his performance in this film, and I liked his character. Again, even if you're in a terrible film, you can have a character that audiences can connect to, and I think Josh Gad got that, and he was able to achieve that. It's almost the case with Judi Dench, although most of the time when I see her on the screen, I'm just like, why are you here? You're so much better than this. And Colin Farrell, again, was underused, so he didn't even get the opportunity to be that type of character this time round. And in the case of the female fairy character that they introduce in this film, I think she has potential. I don't think I saw enough of her to really get me to like her in this film specifically. She's just another example in a very, very long line of female characters that we've gotten in the last decade or so that are very ambitious, and they're not just a love interest, and they're very independent and smart and deserve to be taken seriously in these adventure films, despite the fact that they are still centered around male characters. But whatever. We saw the same thing in Detective Pikachu. We've seen this many times over. We've seen this many times over. She's just another example of that. I don't think there was enough of a defining characteristic to her to make her stand out. But we'll see. If this film gets a sequel, hopefully, one, they'll half the budget, and two, they'll send it straight to Disney Plus, where it was supposed to go in the first place. How dare Disney even think for a second that this was worth sending people to the cinema to pay more than a month's subscription of Disney Plus for? How dare you? Absolutely not. I would not pay to see this in the cinema. Are you joking? No way. Disney Plus is exactly where it belongs. Anyway, I digress. Hopefully, if they do get a sequel, they'll get a chance to dive into all of these characters more, as well as developing the world of the fairies and the trolls and everything in a lot more detail, and hopefully with a lot more of a magical touch. So with all of that said, I'm going to be giving Artemis Fowl a 4 out of 10. So I clearly wasn't the biggest fan of this film, but honestly it's a kids film, so I didn't really expect to love it. And plus, after seeing the trailer and seeing how mediocre it looked there, I wasn't really expecting much to begin with. So it's more of a case of I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. But even then, I'm not really disappointed because I didn't have high hopes. But like I said before, I'm going to be diving into the bigger question here, which is why on earth can't Disney do live action films that aren't related to any existing IP? Why? Especially lately, you have the infamous cases of the Nutcracker in the Four Realms and Wrinkle in Time. I watched the entirety of the Nutcracker in the Four Realms, but I just couldn't believe. The thing is with that film is that it just looks beautiful. It looks stunning, and so you see the potential there to have a really interesting story to go along with that beautiful visual aesthetic. Oh, this film should have been the go-to holiday film for every single family across the land, undoubtedly. And yet, because the story was executed so poorly, because Mackenzie Foy had no real charisma, because of all of those aspects, the film just flopped. It flopped terribly, and no one really talks about it because amongst the MCUs and the Star Warses of the Disney pantheon, you don't really focus on these live action films. But boy, and the budgets as well are so high on these films that they can't really afford to flop. If it wasn't for the fact that Disney had other IPs to lean on, if it was like a Paramount situation where they only had Nutcracker and the Four Realms to lean on for that holiday, they'd be finished. They'd be in administration. And then you have the case of A Wrinkle in Time, which I believe came out the previous year, I'm not sure, but it's a similar thing there as well. You have a really interesting premise, you have a really interesting aesthetic, a very visually striking aesthetic, and the CG there as well, for the most part, was much better than the one that we saw in Artemis Fowl. Terrible, it looked so bad. Anyway, and as well, in a lot of these films, you have these incredible actors. I don't know what these paychecks look like, but they must involve a long string of zeros. But I will say not all of the live action Disney films that aren't like much in remakes of their animated films are that bad. One in particular that really stands out to me as one of the very best films that Disney has ever done, just in general, is Saving Mr. Banks. That film is incredible. It tells the story of the author of Mary Poppins, which actually that's another really good live action Disney film, although it does combine some animated aspects to it. And I'd also highly recommend The Queen of Cartway, which is another live action movie that Disney did a few years back, starring Lupita Nyong'o. I won't say too much about that story, but it's really heartening, it's really endearing, and I think it's an example of when Disney gets things right when it comes to live action movies that aren't related to any of the existing IP that they work with. And so when you see those good results, it makes you wonder what the hell happened with films like A Wrinkle in Time and The Nutcracker in the Four Realms, and unfortunately with Artemis Fowl. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Artemis Fowl and Disney's live action movies, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie and the rest of the films that they have in their pantheon down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching and subscribing. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.